So, I happen to have the background knowledge that you are a Star Trek fan. Has this at all played into your journey?
So one of the things, looking back at my childhood, as a kid, I was always aware of what I was supposed to do. I was always a rule follower, and I always wanted to follow the rules. So I think there was one year, there were often themed Halloween costumes. One year, a bunch of people were doing Halloween. I think that particular year, my brother... Oh, you know what? There might have been more than one year with a Star Trek theme, come to think of it. That particular year, my brother was Riker, and I was going to be a Star Trek character too. But I was aware that I was supposed to pick a girl, because a girl is supposed to pick a girl as her favorite character. Again, I got that message somehow unconsciously from the world, despite the fact that my parents very deliberately did not gender our toys, did not gender our clothes. They were just sort of like, what do you want? Great. You'll play with that? You'll wear that? Awesome. They didn't make a big deal out of gender. They didn't, push us one way or the other. They sort of tried to follow our interests. But still, I got the message. And yet, being a next generation person, I picked Yar. Now, if you're aware of the choices in Star Trek Next Generation, you got Beverly Crusher, Deanna Troi, and Tasha Yar. Boy, did I pick the butchest one I could find. If I didn't have that thought in my mind that I'm supposed to pick a girl, who would I have picked? Honestly, probably Wesley, despite the fact that people hate him. But he was the kid, and I was the kid. But I didn't really think about it much beyond that. I think it only played a role in sort of the bigger picture in terms of influencing the way that I think, which is it's not the sort of direct something to do with plot or characters. It's more in how you think, the underlying things. So I came to my love of Star Trek very naturally. My parents watched Star Trek. So it was, I talked about their way of being, they were not restrictive around gender, but they were also, pretty open-minded in a lot of ways. And I think that played more of a role in my life. So Star Trek had that philosophy, being raised Unitarian Universalist, and which was very, very open to gender and sexuality diversity. I got comprehensive sex education in 6th grade at my congregation that was welcoming to LGBT folks. I don't think we talked about gender at the time. Their current curriculum, as a young adult in that same congregation, the current sexual education is called OWL, Our Whole Lives. It's a joint curriculum between the Unitarian Universalists and the United Church of Christ. And they were seeking a panel of adults to talk to the kids about gender and sexuality. And they said, hey, would you come talk to the OWL students about yourself? Because the kids get to hear from adults who are queer and trans and gay and lesbian and bi and all of the other things. So it's more in sort of the general philosophy and the sort of environment I grew up in.
Gotcha. So I also, are you interested in talking about your experience with media? Writing, things like that.
Right. I guess I could talk about it a little bit. So I was growing up in the 90s, early 2000s. There was more and more sort of representation of a variety of sexuality. Gender, less so. It wasn't really happening when I was a kid or growing up. As a young adult, started to happen more and more. But my experience in engaging with media, both written and on the screen, was through also, if I read something I really enjoyed and you're immersed in the world and you love it, was to go read fanfic. And for me, fanfic was really, really queer, because anytime you didn't get the representation you wanted, or you got just a little bit of it but not very much, people would go and write about it, or they'd go and make something that was straight and queer it. And at first it was around sexuality, but then also again, before it was more prevalent on the screen, it was, or in the books, it was happening in the fandom communities, where people would take a character and be like, what if this character were trans? And start writing that. So I've certainly enjoyed seeing more variety and representation and different things. I would love us to be at a point where you can have a larger variety. I think right now you tend to get, well, we had a stage where everything was very like informative. We're going to have the trans episode to explain such and such a thing, or you have to stop in a book and explain what something is. Okay, but you reach a point where if people know what it is, you don't have to like stop and have a clunky explanation. You can just have a character. Well, the lovely thing about fiction for me is that you would explore extremes, you explore things, you explore complex ideas. So I think you also have a period of time, and I think we're still kind of in it, where the unusual character is either entirely evil or entirely good. And I'm like, well, that's kind of boring. Like, I get you either have people, like, it feels more like propaganda in some cases, whether positive or negative. But I'd love to get to a point where, you have complex characters who are trans, you have complex characters who have diverse sexualities, and you're just telling interesting stories. I'm not much interested, well, there's always an exception. This is the lovely thing. I was going to say I'm not much interested in extremes, but actually some of the stories about an extreme are exploring some really interesting themes. But just having more options out there. I do remember the first time I was reading a book and not because it had a trans character. I was just reading a book because it was the book I wanted to be reading, and boom, there's a trans character in the middle of it. And that was, for me, very lovely, because it was a book, an author I'd read as a child. I grew up reading Tamara Pierce's books. Her first quartet was about, her first quartet was about a girl disguising herself as a boy to become a knight. Gee, I wonder if there are any themes there. Boy, was I disappointed when she was like outed as a girl, and then went on the rest of the series as living as a girl and a woman instead of a man. Wonder if that could have anything to do with me. But meanwhile, the author went on and wrote several other series in that same universe, and in one of them, like one that happened in the past compared to that series, just in the middle of the thing, there's a trans woman. And I hadn't picked up the book because it has a trans character. I had no idea she was in there, and it was just my first time experiencing that. It was just like, lovely, great. It's just there, it's just part of the world, and having fun reading a story.